Hello and welcome to eNow's webinar, Deploy Exchange 2016 On-Prem and Hybrid, presented by Exchange Server MVP Michael Van Hornbeek. We will begin today's discussion with a brief word from Vice President of Sales at eNow, Richard Drulow.
Thank you, Kathy. It's such a pleasure to introduce Michael Van Hornbeek, our resident MVP MCM involved in the Exchange hybrid space. I have the pleasure to work with Michael across a number of global accounts, large accounts like Facebook, Coca-Cola, the city of San Francisco. On a global basis, the eNow platform itself has been uniquely positioned in the hybrid and on-premise space. And led by our CTO, Paul Robichaux, and the MVP community here at eNow, there's a huge commitment to simplify the life of IT administrators as they move to these hybrid deployments, particularly around the 2016 environment, which Michael's going to discuss today with you. If you have a quick look at the eNow dashboard, the way we've architected our technology around the hybrid space is to create a very simple stoplight system that very quickly can troubleshoot real-time challenges that are happening within a hybrid deployment. Key areas like ADFS, DirSync, other components that you'll see in a hybrid deployed environment are quickly troubleshooted real-time with our dashboard that's been developed and built since 2012 and is award-winning, leading the industry. Today, we lead in over 60 countries worldwide with key clients like Coca-Cola and Facebook. And it's with great pleasure today that I announce our leader here, Michael Van Hornbeek, who's going to discuss with you challenges around hybrid and deployments and on-prem with the 2016 announcements that are in the industry today. So with that, I bring you Michael Van Hornbeek, who will get into today's discussion. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and or good afternoon, depending on where you are and where you're joining from. Thanks for being on the webinar today. As said earlier, we're going to talk about hybrid deployments. We're going to talk about Exchange 2016. We're going to talk about on-prem. So there's a lot of ground to cover in just a few moments. But a little bit information about myself. I do work at eNow as a director of product research, which means that I'm involved on the product development side of things. Being the boots on the ground kind of guy, still working with Exchange, Office 365 deployments, I really, want to have the feel of the technology, know, how it operates in the real world, so that we know how we can best create a monitoring solution for those technologies. But other than that, most people actually know me not under my real name, but my nickname Van Hybrid, because I do have a certain love for hybrid deployments. As a matter of fact, I've been working with hybrid deployments since the very, very beginning. And I'm very involved with everything hybrid 2010, 2013, and even 2016 these days. So without further ado, let's just get started and talk about about Office 365, which kind of leads me to the next part, right? I mean, we all know that Office 365 is a big part in our lives today. Even if you're still on premises, chances are that at some point you will be looking at, maybe not moving right away to Office 365, but you'll be looking at it in some shape, way, or form. So, especially for that, what we thought would be a good idea today is that, for two people on the call, two people that have questions, we'll be giving them away an Office 365 for Exchange Professional ebook. So what we will be doing is you can ask your question during the webinar, but we'll treat them at the end, and then two random people will get an ebook for free sent to them later today. So as I said, the agenda for today is pretty simple. We're going to talk Exchange 2016 on premises, which will take up a majority of the time, I think. And then we'll talk about Exchange 2016 in hybrid. Well, to be honest, it could go either way. I do monitor a little bit of the questions that are being asked in the chat window. If I see a lot of questions around hybrid, I might just talk a little bit longer about hybrid, or the other way around. So you kind of dictate, the way it is going. I've got a set agenda. I've got a few talking points of myself, but please feel free to share your, thoughts and questions so that we can keep this as interactive as possible, right? So let's start by adding a disclaimer. The thing is about Exchange, and it's always been like this, right? But Exchange 2016 is, I think Microsoft called it forged in the cloud, which means that they developed it with the Office 365 in mind, and then taken those features and put in the on-premises product. But it also means that, especially if you've been, into the new management paradigm in Office 365 and Exchange 2013 on premises, that the pace of change in those products is much higher than the pace or than what the pace used to be before. We see updates every quarter with the cumulative updates. We see new features come in. Sometimes these are really large features that come in. So, I mean, it's very likely that you'll be looking at this presentation in, a while from now. And what is important is that, everything I tell you today might change tomorrow. It's very unlikely that it will actually change tomorrow, but it might change. It will likely change. Just keep that in mind because, to be honest, Exchange 2016 has been released a few weeks ago. There aren't many deployments out there yet. There aren't as many as Exchange 2013 deployments, and there aren't as many as Exchange 2010 deployments. We know that. So as our experiences grow, probably the guidance from Microsoft will grow. Probably my guidance will change because, I'll find out some nasty things which I'm like, I should have probably done that differently. And that's just how, these recommendations, these best practices change towards the future. Keep that in mind, right? It's really important. So let's move on and talk about the on-premises part. So first question is, it's probably a question, if you're a consultant, that you're going to get asked quite a bit. Are you upgrading to Exchange 2016 or not? Should you be upgrading to Exchange 2016 or not? And to be honest, if you're running Exchange 2010 today, then it makes a lot of sense. I mean, from various angles, right? From a technology perspective, from a feature perspective, and just because Exchange 2016 just left mainstream support. So that are three really good arguments to move to Exchange 2016, or to at least start looking into moving to Exchange 2016. And when we take a look at the history, that's also how, things have gone with Exchange 2013. A lot of 2007 customers went to 2013. There are a lot of 2010 customers that went, but most of the 2010 customers, they were just happy with where they are, right? And that's, usually been the case, that you skip a version and move to a version. But for Exchange 2016, right, there is a big use case. If you're running on 2013, you're getting value. I'm not going to lie to you. You're getting value. It's newer technology. It's better technology. It's an evolution of Exchange 2013. And we'll take a look at the version of Exchange 2016. It's not a new major version. It's 15.1. So you could argue that it's more like a service pack to Exchange 2013, which in a way it might be. But the question from when upgrading from 2013 to 2016 is, do you have to? You don't have to. There's nothing forcing you. It's rather a question of whether the feature set that Exchange 2016 is giving you is actually, worth it for you. Especially if there's one of, the collaboration features that you think would really prove valuable in your organization, then yes, that's your use case for 2016. But from a purely architectural deployment perspective, I don't think that Exchange 2016 today brings a lot to the table which says, yes, this is the one killer feature that makes me must upgrade to Exchange 2013. That's not the case. But, today, let's assume that you decide to take advantage, or that you want to take advantage of the new collaboration features, especially NOAA. They're really great because they're like, whatever you see in Office 365, split screen where you have the document on the left and the email on the right. So if you want to have, these cool advantages, these new cool features, then the problem is that you need the Office Web App Server. I was going to say Office Web App is Office Server, the former WAC. The problem is it's not available today yet. So even if you decide, yes, this is great, I want to go there, then you won't be able to have the full feature set if you do that today. Of course, we all know that at some point in the future that Office Server is going to be available, and you're going to be able to use it, but it doesn't prevent you from starting to look into planning and how to deploy or how to move forward with Exchange 2016, right? So just keep that in mind. There are some things that you need to know before you go, right? First of all, as it was before, and it will probably be for a long time, is that you cannot mix and match Exchange 2013, 2016 mailbox servers in a DAG, right? I don't think or I'm pretty sure that today there's nothing preventing you to do so, which means that you could add an Exchange 2013 DAG or 2016 mailbox server to a DAG, and it will accept you to do that, but it's a bad idea. That's where, bad things happen. So just know that even though there is nothing preventing you to do it today, no error message or something, that you shouldn't be doing that. I imagine that this is something that Microsoft will probably change in a future update where, they'll hard stop you from trying to add a different version into an older version DAG. Outlook 2007 is not a great idea to use with Exchange 2016. Not supported, not working. Not working. Maybe you can find all sorts of ways of getting it to work, but I don't think that's the route you want to go down. So if you're still using Outlook 2007 today, then don't go to 2016, or rather upgrade Outlook and then go to 2016. So I'm not advertising you shouldn't go to 2016. And of course, if you're still in 2003, and that's a big shame on you, then you cannot upgrade to 2016 in one go. You'll have to go to 2010, for instance, first, and then decommission 2003, and then you can do a double hop from 2010 to 2016. So it's, a stopgap measure, but unfortunately, there's no direct upgrade path for you. It's always been like that, N-2. So it's not really surprising, but still, if you are unlucky enough to be in a 2003 environment, then there you go. I'm just going to pick a quick question that I saw. Can you mix and match DAGs from 2010 and 2016? Absolutely not. So that is definitely a no-go. No worries there. Anyway, let's dive a little bit deeper into the prerequisites. What does it look like if you want to deploy 2016? Well, from an Active Directory perspective, you need to be on Windows Server 2008 or higher domain functional level, first functional level, which is a change from before, where 2003 would do. I believe one of the reasons that Microsoft said they do that is to align with the support statement from the Windows Server team, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, again, if you're running Windows Server 2003, which unfortunately I know a lot of customers that are still running on 2003 Active Directory levels, it's really time for you to start looking into upgrading that. I mean, we're in the era where there's 2012 R2, that Windows Server 10 2016 is probably going to be released in the next few months. It's really time to upgrade. I mean, don't get stuck in the past. Make sure that you're on board with newer technology. Then Windows Server 2012 or higher, of course, I recommend 2012 R2, .NET Framework 4.5.2, Unified Communications Management API, and some OS level requirements. And by the way, these OS level requirements, you can have the installer install them for you, or you can do that separately. But in the end, it just comes down to the fact that I just want to make sure that you always use the latest versions of what is available on the server, right? So if you can go with 2012 R2, then yes, that is great. So if we take a look at a coexistence point of view, and by coexistence I mean server side, client side, what can you do, what can't you do? Well, from a 2010 you need Service Pack 3, Update Rollout 11 in order to be able to coexist with 2016, and 2013 Cumulative Update 10. From a client side, as I said, 2007 not supported, not working, so that's a 2010 Service Pack 2 or higher at least, and an Outlook for Mac 2011 or higher. The recommendation here is pretty simple. Use the latest versions wherever possible. It is really, really important. If you upgrade to 2016 in 6 months from now, then maybe there's a new cumulative update for Exchange 2013. Use that one. Don't get caught up in I just need 2010 cumulative update 10. Just take the latest version of what you have available. And the same goes for your clients. I mean, make sure that your clients are patched up to the latest version that is available at the point that you're going to upgrade, and your experience will be as smooth as it can be. However, if you're flirting with the minimum requirements, then obviously your experience is going to be less great. So it's a general recommendation, and it's one that we carry through for Office 365. And I think even in the latter situation, being up to date is more important. But we'll talk about that when we get to the hybrid stuff later in this presentation, right? So that's really important. From a planning perspective, I mean, if you've been doing Exchange 2013 deployments before, you're going to find that an Exchange 2016 deployment is similar. It's not 100% the same, and I'm really glad to see that the role requirements calculator was updated recently. And if you've been taking a look, or if you've been monitoring the Exchange team website, you'll see that over the past few days they've been releasing a constant stream of new recommendations, information on how to install, coexist with Exchange 2016. So yeah, that's really that's really great. So the role requirements calculator that was updated recently does take into account some changes under the hood, even though those changes are really earth-shattering. So you'll see that the recommendations that it'll spit out are very similar to what you saw before, and the same goes for the preferred architecture. So the preferred architecture is similar to 2013, with that exception that by now we all know there is no separate roles in Exchange 2016, so there is no decision on whether you should go multi-role or not. It's multi-role, period. And the interesting part about the preferred architecture is that there's a lot of new or not a lot, there's a few new recommendations that I find really interesting that we should maybe talk about. But before we do that, I definitely want to point out one tool which I absolutely love, and that's the Exchange Deployment Assistant. And the reason why I think it's a really, really, really great tool is because I use it as a, call it pre-flight checklist. You go through the scenarios, you point out, hey, I want to deploy Exchange 2016, and it goes through all the steps that you need to go through to successfully deploy Exchange 2016. Now, keep in mind that if you go through the deployment assistant, it gives you a cookie-cut version of what the steps are you need to do. It doesn't take into account any specific things to your environment. So every customer's environment is different, right? There's always that little bit and piece that makes it unique to that customer. The deployment assistant cannot take that into account. It will give you general guidelines and tell you where you have to go, what you have to do, right? But if you use it as a plan to, hey, these are the steps I need to go to, and you can check them off while you're doing them yourself, specific to your environment, you actually have a really good checklist that can keep you on track. I just monitored the chat window, so the links on the presentation are clickable and they will take you to the website right away, so no worries there. But thanks, Gareth, for sharing it through the chat. As I said, the preferred architecture is similar to what we saw in Exchange 2013. Well, what you see is the unbound namespace model is still recommended. You can go with a bound namespace model, so it's not something that prevents you to. It's just a general recommendation from Microsoft. Load balancing, equal distribution across data centers. DNS round robin is a good way of doing it. And the reason why I think Microsoft suggests DNS round robin is just because it's easier. Easy is good. The simplest solution that you can deploy, the better it is. But it doesn't prevent you from using, GL DNS load balancing. If you've got a cluster, let's say you've got an F5 cluster, really good devices, or a CAM cluster with GeoDNS enabled, just reuse them. I mean, if you've already got them, then there's no sense of not using them. You don't have to fit yourself into these guidelines, right? I mean, you could do DNS round robin, but you are not required to. Anyway, the one thing I find really interesting is the Office server. As I mentioned, it's not available today, but when you take a look at the recommendations, which make a lot of sense, of course, it tells you that from a high availability point of view, you need to have 2 Office servers per data center. Which means that if you're in an HA deployment with 2 data centers, you're looking at 4 Office servers. Of course, it's interesting because your deployment, if you have a 4-node DAG, just grew from 4 servers Exchange 2010 or Exchange 2016 only to 4 servers for Exchange and 4 servers for the Office server. Now the good thing is if you're and the DC in this case, sorry, is data center. But the important part here is the Office servers, they serve multiple purposes. Of course, they only serve multiple purposes if you use other Microsoft technologies as well. So you could use Skype for Business and then have these Office servers for that. You could use SharePoint and use the Office servers for that. And you have Exchange and leverage the same Office servers or Office server farm. However, if you've got none of those and only got Exchange, then of course these Office servers will only be dealing with your Exchange workloads. And even from an implementation point of view, these Office services or Office servers, they are the odd ones out because load balancing Exchange 2013, 2016 is pretty easy, layer 4, layer 7, no affinity required, whereas the Office servers, they do have affinity requirements. So they do add, unfortunately, a little bit of complexity to your deployment, but that being said, it is a necessity, especially for Exchange 2016 and those new collaboration features, which, in all honesty, if I were to deploy Exchange 2016, those were the reasons why I would do it, right? Let's take a look at some of the new recommendations that Microsoft has released with Exchange 2016. Well, and I think these make a lot of sense. Before going through these recommendations, yes, Kurt, Ali, the physical servers are still recommended, so just go with physical machines. It's not that you cannot deploy VMs, of course you can, but the preferred architecture says that you should go with physical servers for all sorts of reasons. It's a discussion that we can have offline if you want. It's one that's it's being fought heavily, but sure, you can virtualize Exchange easily. That's not a problem. Yeah, we'll get to the hybrid stuff. No worries. So BitLocker for disk encryption, just, if someone takes out a physical disk from your server, then they wouldn't be able to read data. Of course, why is that recommendation there? Well, if you've got a physical machine, 10 disks, then a recommendation is to have several databases per disk, per spindle, which means that if you take out a spindle, then you would have access to several databases, even though that it's not plain text. But if you don't encrypt the data on the disks, that it would be much easier to get to the data. And then the data volumes that you use for the databases and all that should be using REFS, which to me is a really interesting move forward. Because a while back, Michel Delory, another Exchange MVP, he made the comparison in performance between REFS and NTFS. He came up with an interesting conclusion that today NTFS is still a little bit more performing than REFS. But of course, these were test lab results, not real world results. But it's an interesting thought. I thought I'm going to share the article with you so that you can have a read over that. Anyway, enough talked about how things are supposed to work. Let's take a look at how Exchange 2010 will work or Exchange 2016 will work in an Exchange 2010 interoperability environment. Well, down-level proxying only, which means that if you are coexisting with Exchange 2010, then all client traffic should flow through an Exchange 2016 server, which will then decide what it will do with the traffic. So if an Exchange or even Outlook user, Outlook Web App, or ActiveSync user hits an Exchange 2016 server, that Exchange 2016 server will then proxy traffic to an Exchange 2010 CAS server, whether it's inside or out of site. Of course, if the external URLs are set, then what will happen is that in certain cases you will get the redirect, right? The coexistence or the interoperability between 2016 and previous versions is much easier story compared to how it was before, right? It's much easier to deal with, especially when you were looking at the 2013 operability. So imagine you're in 2013, you're going to go to 2016. Then there's two ways that Exchange 2016 can be interoperable with 2013. First of all, up-level proxying, which is new, which means that an Exchange user, Outlook, any client can talk to an Exchange 2013 CAS server, which can then proxy a request to an Exchange 2016 server, which, when we're going to talk about cutting over from one version to the other one, becomes a really interesting use case. Down-level proxying is exactly the same, where a 2016 server will talk to a 2013, and that's the way it's always been. But what it enables you to do is actually mix and match.
Give me your name, number, and a message. I'll get back to you.
Oh, looks like someone's talking on the call here. Anyway, so what we will And what you will be able to do is just mix and match them, which means that you can gradually switch over from one version to the other one if you're interoperating with 2013, rather than having to do the cutover, which from an end user perspective is a lot better. It also helps for all sorts of migrations. If you're going to 2016, but you decide you want to do 2016 hybrid, then it becomes easier for you to deploy that because you don't have to go through all the motions on premises for cutting over the clients, which is usually a very intrusive action. But anyway, let's continue moving on. Certificate namespaces for a 2010 environment, depending on the unbound or bound namespace, you'll have 7 or 12 certificate names that you need. And I'm not going to go through all of them, right? Because you can read from the slide decks, and there's really good guidance from Microsoft. So one of the things, sorry, there is someone on the bridge that apparently has his voicemail enabled, and that's a little bit annoying. Anyway, so the namespaces, as I said, really depend on the coexistence model. It threw me off there for a second. And what you will notice is that whether you're in 2010, 2013, or just 2016, is that the guidance is pretty similar for any of these versions. Of course, there are specific, differences for each environment, and it also, depends on whether you have a highly available environment, whether you have 2 data centers, whether you're going to have, an Office server farm in both environments, whether it's highly available, and so forth and so on, right? So there's no cookie-cut answer as to, yes, you need 2 namespaces on the certificate, you need 6 or 7. There is a general guidance, and you have to use those guidelines to, kind of assist with understanding what you have to put on the certificate. But one thing I really want to stress, because even today, after the, Autodiscover has been released for many, 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 many years, I come across customers which do not have Autodiscover as a namespace on their certificate, which will break stuff in Exchange on premises, and if you're thinking about going hybrid, it will break stuff there too. I mean, it is critically important that you have those namespaces covered. Everything else are things that you can work around, that you can find solutions for, but Autodiscover really, 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 really is important. Anyway, let's move on and talk a little bit about load balancing. I know I skipped the 2016 certificate requirements a little bit there, but I want to get to the hybrid stuff because that's the fun stuff, right? Load balancing, no specific requirements, same as 2013, really easy, layer 4 or layer 7. But if you use a load balancer, it's just something I saw in many deployments in 2013, 2016, just make sure that you do it smartly. So the health check pages that managed availability exposes for each of the workloads, take advantage of them. Use them to determine the health of the Exchange servers in your pool. Don't just do a ping or a connection on HTTP to the OAuth virtual directory, because there are better ways to do it, right? I mean, we've got managed availability, which is largely a black box, but if you can use it to do things smarter, then please do, right? And also, if you have a pool or larger pool of servers or a smaller pool of servers, anyway, make sure that if you add a new server that it's not being flooded with requests from the get-go, especially if you use an equal distribution of amongst all servers in the pool. Make sure there is a delayed start feature that will just gradually increase the amount of connections to that server, rather than overloading it with every new request until it's on par with everything else. From a pre-deployment point of view, if you're on 2010, just make sure to configure Exchange 2010, the Outlook Anywhere configuration, that the NTLM is included on the IS authentication methods, allow traffic to flow from 2016 to 2010. Similar to what we had in 2013, so that's nothing earth-shattering there. Same goes for the OABs. So if you have, before you deploy Exchange 2016, because 2016, just like 2013, will introduce a new offline address book, make sure that every database has a default offline address book defined so that you don't get what they call a storm on downloading the new OAB as soon as 2016 is introduced in the environment. I mean, if you've got a small environment, it might not be as much of a problem, but in larger environments with several thousands of clients, it's definitely not something you would want to, because that's typically an environment where the OAB would be larger, and then having a mass flooding of people trying to download the new OAB will probably cause some congestion on the network, if not on the servers. And then if you have any Edge subscriptions, rerunning them now before deploying 2010 is really a good idea too. So again, I mean, if you've been in the field for a while and you've done 2013 migrations, this should not be earth-shattering to you, right? This should be something that is very familiar. Installing 2016 is easy, yeah. If you do it through the command line, don't forget to accept the Exchange Server license terms, which always cracks me up. But if you install the prerequisites that we discussed earlier, just reboot, and then install Exchange 2016, have the installer do the Exchange, the Windows components. It's really easy, but you can do them separately. One thing I do recommend you take a look at, if you haven't already, is, again, Michel Leroy's unattended installation script. It is absolutely fabulous. Just a single command line, it installs the server, reboots, auto logs in, does everything without you even having to blink at the Exchange Server installation. It's absolutely fabulous, and it saves you a lot of time. But on that note, one thing I regularly see is the auto-discover. Not only the fact that the certificates don't have the auto-discover namespace, but so the recommendation is that, generally it's better to have an AD staging site or a separate Active Directory site not connected to any clients, where you install an Exchange Server, configure the Exchange Server, and then move it to the production AD site. At least in theory, that's how you should do things. The problem is that creating a staging Active Directory site is not really something that every environment is able to do or willing to do, right? So if you don't have a staging AD site and you're deploying Exchange 2016 directly into the environment or into your production AD site, just make sure that as soon as the server is installed, that you configure the service connection points for auto-discover, because if you don't, then you might get all sorts of Outlook certificate pop-ups for auto-discover. And even though it should not happen, I've seen cases where it does happen for all sorts of race conditions. So, this being said, just keep that in mind and make sure that you pay attention to those, critical little steps, small steps, but really, really important in the long term. Now, we've gone through all the trouble preparing, planning, and installing Exchange 2016. When is the point in time when you switch over, where you decide that all traffic goes to 2016 rather than whatever the older version is? Well, if you're in 2013, there is no cutover point, because you can gradually switch over traffic to Exchange 2016 because they can coexist in the same pool, at least for client access traffic. From a mail flow perspective, where all the MX records point to the Exchange 2016 servers, and Exchange 2016 handle all the connectors, or are the only servers on the connectors and all that, you generally would want to do that once you have migrated more than 50% of the people to Exchange 2016. Yeah, again, these are not set rules that you have to abide to, right? These are general guidelines, but those are things that we see out in the field, how we usually deal with it, and how we feel that things work best. So, if you're on 2010, switching over is similar to what it's on 2013. At some point, you will have to switch over your namespace to 2016, which means that at some point you'll have to make the decision that, hey, everyone, instead of connecting directly to 2010, bam, I'm switching over auto-discover to 2016. I'm switching over the main namespace to 2016. I'm switching over everything else to 2016, which might or might not have an impact to the users. And it might have an impact to the users because, when you're coming from 2010, you will notice that the OL login page is dramatically different, right away from 1 second to the other one once you've done the cutover. In order to facilitate the cutovers, though, one thing that you have to kind of keep in mind is, it really helps if you set the TTL of your records used by Exchange to a very low value, so that when you change DNS records to point to a new endpoint, that all the clients typically update pretty quickly instead of having to wait at least an hour before their current DNS record or current result expire. So that's just a general tip or hint there. Lastly, post-installation task, as I said, the SCP, and then moving some system mailboxes from the legacy version to 2016, because those will allow you to work properly, to have admin audit logging, to have e-discovery, and to have some of the new 2016 functionality discover without any interruption whatsoever. So let's move on and finally talk about hybrid. I've seen some people ask for it earlier. It's definitely my favorite topic. Should you upgrade? First question, kind of similar question as what we started off with Exchange 2016 on premises. So this is a very loaded question. Should you upgrade? Well, the answer is it depends. It's the answer. I know it's a consultant's answer, but take a look at the following flowchart because it's kind of what I use to determine whether or not you should go to 2016 hybrid. If your current version today is Exchange 2013, then by all means keep using 2013. It does a fabulous job at running hybrid. The HCW in 2013 is absolutely great. No need to just upgrade to 2016 for that purpose. I'm not taking into account any usage of Exchange 2016 on premises here. I'm just taking that into the perspective, putting it into perspective for hybrid functionality. There's no reason why you should go to 2016 other than you being able to use the new hybrid configuration wizard at this point in time. But then again, there's no specific reason to. If you're on 2010, then how I like to tackle it is the use case of your hybrid deployment. So if you're a company that decided to move to Office 365 and abandon Exchange on premises at some point in the near future, then I think there is little value to go to a 2013 or 2016 hybrid right away. Sure, there are some corner cases, use cases why you want to do that and so forth and so on. But if you're just using hybrid as a vehicle to move mailboxes from on-premises to the cloud, then by all means go with 2010 because it'll move mailboxes just as easily as 2013 and 2016. Especially if you're looking for a short migration time, not something that's going to coexist for several months or longer than that, then just go with 2010. It just does what it needs to do. And I actually realized that the flowchart has an issue, so I'll update that once we get once we hand out the slide deck. But when you do a migration, then it should point to use an Exchange 2010 hybrid. If you're going to a coexistence scenario, then you should be using an Exchange 2013. So on the left-hand side, the use Exchange 2013 or 2016 should be use Exchange 2010. So from a coexistence perspective, if you're happy with just FreeBusy and nothing fancy and you're cutting over to Exchange, to Office 365 at some point in time, just keep using 2010. However, if you're going to coexist on the long term, you want to take advantage of new features, then absolutely yes, go with a 2013 or 2016 hybrid. And of course, if you're on 2010 today, please go with 2016 for hybrid deployment purposes, because it makes a lot of sense on the long term. Because one of the reasons is that Exchange 2010 is out of mainstream support today, and even though you can still use it for hybrid, I wouldn't be too surprised at some point in the future that Exchange 2010 hybrid will not be supported any longer. So, keeping that in mind, we're, close to get to the verge of, getting there potentially. One argument I'd like to make to using 2013 or 2016 for migration purposes only is the new ActiveSync redirect feature. So it's not that new anymore. It was released last year, but the ActiveSync redirect feature, what it actually does is when you move a mailbox to Office 365 and your on-premises version is Exchange 2013 or 2016, whenever a client hits the on-premises server and the server tells them, hey, your mailbox has moved to Office 365, in 2013 and 2016, it will actually also issue a 451 redirect for ActiveSync clients telling them, hey, by the way, your mailbox has moved to Office 365 and this is a new endpoint where you should go to and get your mailbox data, which means that the migration for ActiveSync clients is also seamless. However, if you're on 2010 and you're moving mailboxes to Office 365, that 451 redirect does not happen, which means that even though Outlook clients get updated automatically after the move to Office 365, your ActiveSync clients will not. Which means that if you're in a large deployment with a lot of clients, there you'll have a lot of work reconfiguring the ActiveSync clients on the devices. Now, it's not hard to reconfigure an ActiveSync device, and I've seen a lot of companies just hand out postcards or little cheat cards to their users and be like, hey, this is how you do a new profile. And usually they get away with it. But anyway, just keep that in mind. 2016 hybrid. The new hybrid configuration wizard, what's the value that you can get there? Well, honestly, it depends. Again, I mean, I'm mentioning it depends a lot. But that's just because it really depends on your use cases. There is no cookie-cut answer to what you should do. And to that defense, even though I'm a big hybrid fan, you should not assume that hybrid is the right migration way to Office 365 all the time. But that's a different discussion that we can have at a different time. But anyway, the new hybrid configuration wizard in Exchange 2016, the reason why I'm calling it new is because it's very similar to what Exchange 2013 does. But right now, the bits and pieces are no longer hosted in the on-premises Exchange version, which means that if you run the hybrid configuration wizard, what you're doing is you're invoking a component which is hosted in Azure by Microsoft, which similarly like the OAuth configuration wizard in Exchange 2013 just runs the hybrid configuration wizard bits and pieces from a remote web server, and by doing so, you always get the latest version of it, which means that you will not get into a problem where the on-premises version of Exchange 2016 you're running is running behind on what Office 365 is doing. And we've seen that happen in the past with Exchange 2013, where Microsoft would have made a change in Office 365, but that change was incompatible with, let's say Exchange 2013 CU5, but you needed CU6 hybrid to successfully set up hybrid, but you didn't have it on premises, so you'd run the hybrid configuration wizard and it would fail because there's incompatibility. So the reason why Microsoft has been able to solve those problems is either by releasing a hotfix, which is a lot of work for Microsoft, or just tell you, hey, you know what, wait until CU6 is released or CU7 is released or whatever, not version specific, but wait until this update is available for you and you'll be able to rerun or run the hybrid configuration wizard again. Of course, that's a nuisance. It's not something Microsoft wants us to deal with. They want to make sure that whenever you run it, however you run it with the latest version and you don't run into any of these compatibility issues. That's why the new wizard is there. That's why I like it so much. To me, as a consultant, really from a technology perspective, this is one of the biggest improvements that has been made in Exchange 2016, right? Under the hood, the 2016 hybrid configuration wizard has a lot of things that have improved over a long time. Like I remember in the 2010 days that I was complaining about the fact that you had to configure the MRS proxy on the Exchange client access servers manually. It was yet another thing that you had to do manually next to running the HCW. In 2013, not sure when it was, C4, C5, I think Microsoft added the ability to automatically configure the MRS proxy on all the client access servers in your environment, but that introduced other issues in larger environments with multiple sites where the HCW would take hours and hours to run, right? And this is being solved in the Exchange 2016 hybrid as well. The way that they update these client access servers or get information for these client access servers is done in a much smarter way so that it doesn't run for hours and hours and hours without end. So there are a lot of arguments for going 2016 hybrid if you go hybrid, but then again, you have to outweigh the benefits that you get from going to 2016 versus the effort that you need to go through to implement 2016. Arguably, if you're on 2013 today, implementing 2016 hybrid is probably a breeze, just because you can easily coexist 2013 and 2016. If you're on 2010, as I mentioned earlier, you have to go through a full on-premises deployment, and by a full on-premises deployment, I'm talking about the general recommendation. But before I go through that, I want to talk about something I've seen out in the field, which is important, to understand, right? So Microsoft's recommendation today is that if you go for a hybrid deployment, that you do a full on-premises deployment, switch over the namespaces correctly, just as if you would go through an on-premises migration. But if you do not, decide to move mailboxes on-premises, that's fine. But you still need to move over namespaces to Exchange 2016 in an Exchange 2010 environment because of the way that it coexists, right? Everyone's in agreement there. However, that cutover, that namespace cutover, that client cutover from 2010 to 2016, it does involve a lot of work, and it is very visible to the clients. So customers just wanting to implement 2016 for hybrid purposes don't always want to go through the trouble. So what I've seen and what I've done in the past is set up a hybrid namespace, which means that we keep the namespaces that we have today, as you can see on the image here, where we will have auto discover, which we will point out to Exchange 2016, right? We will point it to 2016 because that's not very intrusive. It doesn't make a lot of change to the clients. And we keep the main namespace pointing to Exchange 2010, whereas we will introduce a fully new hybrid namespace for hybrid purposes that will be used for hybrid mail flow, that will be used for moving mailboxes to Office 365. Does this work? Absolutely. Do you want to do this? No, absolutely not. I mean, as someone who deals a lot with hybrid deployments when I go into a customer's environment, I will never, ever, ever, ever tell them to do this. Even though that a lot of things are technically feasible, there's a lot of things to be said about not doing this. Reason one is, first of all, it's not supported. And I know that being not supported for a lot of customers is not something that withholds them of doing things, but it should be a very big consideration. Second of all, think about what you're trying to achieve, right? If you're just migrating, then why in the first place are you going to Office 360, or why in the first place are you going to Exchange 2016? Why not just reuse the 2010 and migrate them that way? It just saves you a lot of work there too. It just saves you installing Exchange 2016, doing some sort of cutover, some sort of configuration, and you can move them just as easily. And thirdly, it adds complexity because you now have another namespace to take into account. Your client connectivity model is not predictable because it's not the way that it should be, that it, how Exchange 2016 expect things to be. So basically, you're hacking your way around going hybrid. So, I mean, the reason why I put this slide up there, I could just, ignore it to death and tell you, no, there's no feasible way to do it, is because I've seen it happen out there multiple times. People try and hack their ways into doing this, fail miserably, and then have lots of issues. I'd rather make sure that you go through all the motions of setting up Exchange 2016 or 2013 for that matter correctly on premises. And yes, if you're on an older version of Exchange, that means that you'll go through a lot more work. But that's just, things that you have to deal with. That's one of the reasons why keeping up to date with technology actually buys you a lot of benefits. If you are someone who is already on 2013 today, then your upgrade path to 2016, whether it is for on-premises or for hybrid, is just really easy. It is a breeze. I mean, it's how coexistence should have been for the past, which we all know isn't the case. But now you're finally at the place where you can take advantage of that. However, if you're still lingering around on 2007, 2010, God forbid even on 2003, you're just complicating things. And I do realize there's a lot of discussions as to why you can or cannot upgrade, but just think about it, right? It's better to do things right from the get-go than trying to hack your way around what you can and cannot do. This being said, Richard started off this presentation earlier talking about Mailscape and what we do. I really want to stress that our monitoring solutions, our monitoring solution for Exchange on-premises fully supports Exchange 2016, which means that we take advantage of features like managed availability, give you insights into the DAG and all of that. But more importantly, with the time that remains, I want to go through some of the questions. So if you asked the question early on in the webinar, then please share it again in the chat window right now. I'll scroll up a little bit, but I want to avoid having to read through everything. No, you do not need to enable basic authentication on the AWS Virtual Directory. Does the Autodiscover server SRV DNS record work as an alternative to the Autodiscover namespace? No. So Autodiscover namespace is still there, the SRV DNS record, and I mean, yes and no. You'll always need an Autodiscover namespace, that's for sure. What you can use SRV DNS records is to actually, have clients in one domain go to Autodiscover from a different domain name, namespace. So if your primary domain is company B, then you could leverage the service records, for instance, to go to an Autodiscover for domain A, which presumably is in the same organization, right? I mean, just make sure that you use it for that. You cannot just not have the namespace on a certificate or not have an Autodiscover namespace and rely on a service SRV record. Not at all. So while we're waiting for some more questions, and let me scroll up. So won't HTW create a namespace address space for you like a 2013 hybrid? Well, it depends what namespace you're looking for. So what the hybrid configuration wizard does, it reuses the tenant coexistence domain, if you will, which is used for cross-premises mail flow in a hybrid deployment, but it does not generate an external namespace which you use to connect into your environment and have mailboxes flow over that or through that endpoint. That is something that's entirely up to you. But again, there's no such thing as a hybrid namespace. What you need to do is just point your existing namespace to that to your Exchange 2016 servers and reuse that. Now, this being said, it's an interesting thought of introducing hybrid namespaces. So if you have mail.domain.com, which points to Exchange 2010 or 2016, and autodiscover.domain.com pointing to the same set of servers for general client connectivity, then you can actually introduce hybrid1.domain.com and hybrid2.domain.com to point to several Exchange 2016 servers. As a matter of fact, if you're doing high velocity migrations and you want to have a predictable migration path from on-premises to Office 365, it's actually good to bypass load balancers for mailbox migrations to Office 365. So you could use the hybrid1.domain.com and point it to one Exchange server, and then use hybrid2.domain.com and point it to the other Exchange 2016 server. And then for one migration batch, you point to one endpoint, and the other migration batch, you point to the other endpoint. So that's a use where a so-called hybrid namespace would actually be into play. So that's definitely something that you should be doing or should be looking into, because it makes troubleshooting afterwards a lot easier. So let me go back. Can you use BitLocker on REFS yet? Gareth, that's a really good question, which I would have to follow up with. I would say I think so, but I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to have to look it up. Do we have any reference for virtual directory authentication for Exchange 2016 Hybrid? Rizzy, I'm not quite sure what you mean with the reference for which virtual directory are you referencing to. I know that the hybrid configuration wizard will, amongst other things, configure authentication for the virtual directories. It will enable OAuth on some of the Exchange Web Services virtual directory if you run it in 2013 or 2016. So that's definitely something that is added on top of the regular or the default authentication mechanisms. And I think one of the things I've seen before, but I haven't run into that lately, is WS security, where that would be missing on a virtual directory, causing all sorts of other issues. But that's no longer the case. So let's move up a little bit, get some questions in. So are cross-forest migrations still supported from 2010-2013? As far as I know, they are. There's no difference there. So that's still something that you can do. Let me go there. Let me go up a little bit. So since you cannot mix and match Exchange 2016 and 2010 mailbox servers in the same DAG, how do you seed the databases to activate those copies in a new Exchange 2016 environment? That's an on-prem question. We have to mix and match them a little bit here. So what you do is you build your Exchange 2016 environment, you build your Exchange 2016 DAG, you create the databases, you create the database copies, which might be empty or almost empty across all the Exchange 2016 databases, and then you move mailboxes from 2010 or 2013 mailbox databases to those Exchange 2016 databases in the DAG. So it's not that you seed databases from one DAG to the other one. You actually move mailboxes between databases that live in a different DAG. So there was someone who said, I have a namespace called hybrid.domain.com, which is pointed to the firewall load balancer. Can I have a load balancer in front of my multiple MRS proxy servers for moving mailboxes? It's a question I almost answered before. You can, but you shouldn't, because load balancing on the MRS proxy sometimes could cause issues where move requests or mailbox moves to Office 365 get stalled and are a lot slower. It's better to just point them directly to the Exchange server handling the move requests, and that's definitely a better way moving forward. So, is the search actually improved when searching in Exchange 2016? Yes, so search is improved, absolutely. There was an interesting talk at Ignite earlier this year where they disclosed how they improved search in Exchange 2016. Exchange 2016 works really good with Outlook 2013. I'm using Outlook 2016 for a while now, and it works really good as well. So arguably, just use the latest version, whatever you can. That's something I would recommend. It's a general recommendation in for pretty much everything that you deal with, right? If you have access to Outlook 2016 and there's no constraints to using it, then why not just use Outlook 2016, right? Any change in public folders? I believe that's one of the areas where there's nothing much that's changed. I mean, it's something that where Microsoft has been improving over time a little bit, bit by at a time, but it's not that it has dramatically improved or changed between 2013 or 2016. If you're talking 2010 to 2016, that is entirely different, but it's the same story as you go from 2010 to 2013. That's also entirely different. So here's another question. I have 8 Exchange 2010 servers in one hybrid setup. One server is hybrid server. All the Exchange servers have the MRS proxy enables. I plan to migrate to Exchange 2016. Do I have to move the mailboxes from Exchange 2010 to 2016, then to Office 365? No. So you can definitely use 2016 to have be the endpoint for hybrid mailbox moves, and then pull the mailboxes from 2010 directly out to Office 365. That is perfectly possible. One thing I did want to point out in your question is you mentioned a hybrid server. In a presentation I did recently, there is no such thing as a hybrid server. I know that people keep referring to that as a hybrid server, but the only thing that exists is an Exchange server that executes hybrid workloads. It's an Exchange server like any other server. It isn't a server role, and it shouldn't be treated as such. It shouldn't be dealt with differently. It shouldn't be sized differently. It should just be dealt with like any other Exchange server in the pool. I just want to point that out. I'm not saying that you didn't do that, but I really do my best to keep myself from talking about a hybrid server, because in a sense it confuses a lot of people and it doesn't exist. There's a hybrid namespace, I agree, but there's just Exchange servers doing hybrid workloads, and those Exchange servers can be 2010, 2013, 2016. And then I think one of the last questions I'm going to tackle here is one from Todd. Can we migrate PFs natively yet, so public folders natively? If you're talking between 2013 and 2016, sure, it's a mailbox that you can move, public folder mailbox. 2010 to 2016, it's the same process as what we have today from 2010 to 2013. So that's a lot of work. To Office 365, modern public folders, still a problem. Well, not a problem, still a little bit convoluted, but yeah, it's getting better over time. How about diagnostics and performance logging plus the mail queue? Any improvements in terms of capping the growth? As far as I know, and what I've seen in Exchange 2016 so far, it's similar to what we saw in 2013. So there's a lot of performance logging, a lot of data that's being stored. There's a lot of good scripts out there. I think Brian Reed has posted a script to clean that up for you. I know Exchange does some of the cleanup, but it definitely doesn't do all of the cleanup for you. I'll go through some of the other questions because I'm getting a lot of questions here and a really hard time keeping up with them. Are there any changes with shared mailboxes in 2016? No. As far as I know, no changes there, no UM enabling them yet. I mean, there's a way to hack around that, but you definitely don't want to do that. Can we migrate PFs natively from on-prem to Office 365? Not in the way that you're looking at it, Todd. Unfortunately, not. So Kurt says, hey, try de-emphasizing them, which is an interesting discussion because, yes, you could de-emphasize them, but they do have certain value in a lot of organizations. Anyway, last question that I'm going to take here. Are there any improvements in throughput for onboarding, offboarding with Exchange 2016? Well, to be honest, the improvements or the onboarding, offboarding experience for throughput have seldom to do with the Exchange Server code. The product by itself. The improvement or the throughput is in a lot of the cases, because the Exchange server is undersized, because you don't have enough Exchange servers to deal with the load, because the internet connection isn't, performing enough or doesn't have enough bandwidth. Those are far more common issues or common things to deal with for migration throughputs. As I said, one of the ways to deal with it is making sure that you have several migration endpoints pointing to your Exchange 2016 servers, to your different Exchange 2016 servers, and then deal with them on a per migration request basis. Alternatively, Gareth mentioned it, you could use ExpressRoute for Office 365, but that gets you into a different discussion, a different bucket, because it's more network connectivity, and it might solve network connectivity, latency, or bandwidth to Office 365. But if your Exchange server on premises is overloaded, underperforming, or doesn't have enough resources, you will not speed up your migration in any way. Anyway. We are back on top of the hour, so I would like to thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, my email address is in the slide deck, which you will be getting later. If you have any questions, any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. I'll make sure to answer them in a timely fashion. And other than that, thanks for joining, and I'll see you at the next webinar.